know how I got these scars.
Rebel Moon Part 2 is called Scargiver because apparently that's the nickname of the movie's heroine, Cora. But the truth is, watching this film does things to you. It leaves an indelible mark, sucking 2 hours of your life away. And quite possibly part of your soul too. They may not be visible, but I'm pretty sure I've endured some deep psychological scars from watching this absolute shower. Given the first film was quite possibly one of the worst films ever made, I suppose I was asking for trouble by even entertaining watching this steaming pile of excrement. Ozzy Osbourne once did acid for a year just to see what it would do to him. I decided to watch Rebel Moon Part 2 to conduct a similar experiment. The results weren't pretty. There were shakes, there were moans of anguish, blackouts, and judging by the state of my living room, I'm pretty sure I lost control of my bowels at some point. Trying to decide which Rebel Moon film is better is like trying to decide who your favourite serial killer is. But if I were to be pushed to make a decision, I'd have to say Part 2 is actually the worst movie. This is something I barely thought possible, but Zack Snyder has done it. This guy is a fucking miracle. Producing such a smelly turd of a movie with zero entertaining bits, with zero creativity or ingenuity, is a feat which should not be sniffed at. It's rare that I give Disney any credit these days, but deciding they wanted nothing to do with this shit show was probably the greatest creative and business decision they've made in recent history. Rebel Moon Part 1 was a terrible derivative mess, stealing parts from Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Guardians of the Galaxy, Dune and the Magnificent Seven. However, Part 2 slims down the plagiarism somewhat, with Snyder mainly plumping to recreate the Magnificent Seven in space. That's if the Magnificent Seven were going to be made up of the most boring and uninteresting characters in the history of film. The movie starts with the last one left off. Our heroes, having vanquished the evil Atticus, head back to the village to revel in their victory and celebrate. But hang on, not so fast our fantastically boring and completely uninteresting heroes, because guess what? The villain is not so dead after all. He's been revived by some weird robot people using some very familiar revival techniques. Why they felt the need to bring this guy back for Part 2 is beyond me. Why not introduce another villain? Maybe one who is actually scary or interesting. This guy is neither. I was more intimidated by the floater I dropped in my toilet this morning. Now that really was terrifying. At one point I even thought it might start climbing the porcelain to come and get me. Upon learning that the villain was only mostly dead, has been miracle maxed back to life, and the baddies are now on their way, our heroes decide they're going to harvest all the grain on the planet and use it as edible sandbags which will protect them from being blasted by the big Death Star cannon the baddies have got. This will force the baddies into landing, and this is where our Magnificent Seven-like skirmish can happen. Then we are treated to 3/4 of an hour of farming shots. It was about this time where I started chewing on my own foot, and to be honest I was kind of thinking that Jeremy Clarkson might rock up at some point. The farming montage is broken when our heroine Cora hooks up with the useless guy from the first movie. Now it seems that she suddenly loves him. Where the fuck did this come from? In the first film they had zero chemistry, and she spent most of her time saving him from getting both metaphorically and actually fucked. Anyway, their rampant sex session gives us an excuse to get some saucy pillow talk into the storyline. Cora decides to spice things up with Gunnar by telling him about this one time at Assassin's Camp when she led a king and queen who everyone loved into an ambush where they were both brutally stabbed to death. On top of that, she tells him how she personally murdered a young child she was supposed to be protecting. I would have thought that would have been a great turn-off, but no, this dude's down with that. In fact, it only seems to make him like her more. What a fucking wrong'un. Anyway, this burst of honesty prompts a round table from the rest of our heroes who decide to tell us how badly they've been fucked over by the mother world. It's a pretty dull, lazy and uninteresting way to feed us their backstories, but if he was going to do it, you'd think Snyder would at least make these stories interesting in some way. But no, these stories are just dull. It's almost as if he couldn't be bothered to write these guys proper backstories because the characters are just so fucking forgettable. The scene almost reminds me of the classic Four Yorkshiremen comedy sketch where four Yorkshiremen try to outdo each other with tales about how bad their upbringing is.
You were lucky to have a room. We used to have to live in corridor.
Corridor? Oh, I used to dream of living in a corridor. That would have been a palace to us.
The only difference is the stories in Rebel Moon Part 2 aren't funny, entertaining, or even remotely interesting. I got screwed over by the mother world so bad, I decided to give myself a really shit haircut and jettison any personality I may have had. That were paradise. I was done over by the mother world so bad I decided to wax my nipples and throw away all my t-shirts. Luxury. The mother world forced me to drink my body weight in alcohol every day and to turn in a really bad acting performance. All I can say is you were damned lucky. The mother world pissed me off so bad I decided to chop my own arms off. After this meandering and shocking hour of filler, there's the small matter of the final battle, which is where we get full Magnificent Seven in space. The bad guys arrive and do a quick scan of the planet, which reveals they can't use their big weapons because this would destroy the grain. But unfortunately these scanners don't inform them about the good guys hiding in a tunnel network with loads of portable rocket launchers. The whole land skirmish is very derivative, and the whole thing felt like a group of school kids playing war on a playground. The choreography is terrible, and the less said about the CGI the better. We get a complete knockoff of Independence Day, where Cora and Gunnar decide to drive a knackered old flyer into the baddies' mothership. Of course, the baddies' scanners fail them again, so they decide to just let them in. Then, when the bad guys finally do realise that Cora is on board their ship kicking ass and taking names, they inexplicably decide they don't want the grain anymore, so decide to fire their Death Star-like weapon. Unfortunately, they don't realise that Cora can now see into the future and has managed to plant a bomb which will indeed go off and destroy the bad guy's ship when they launch their Death Star weapon. Then we get a shoddy attempt at some emotional payoffs when some of our heroes get killed off. The only problem is no one gives a monkey's toss about any of these people. Now with the baddies beaten and our villain killed off, hopefully for the last time, our heroes get to do some celebrating. But not Cora. She's decided it would be a good time to indulge in some self-flagellation. She decides to spoil the party atmos by telling everyone that she's not only murdered a child, but murdered a child who would have saved the whole universe. But you'll never guess what. Turns out the little girl isn't dead after all and is probably just living it up in Barbados. Turns out everyone knew this, but no one bothered to tell Cora. Anyway, no one seems to care that she thought she was a child killer. Luckily Gunnar is brown bread at this point, otherwise he might have found this all a bit of a turn on and might have been asking for a quickie. Fuck me, Rebel Moon Part 2 was dog shit, but what is even more terrifying is that Snyder has set this up for a third film. Please, Zack, and all the money men behind you, for the benefit of this universe and the whole of life's kind, please, please, just stop.